Good morning, everyone. I'm Selena McLaurin with the Nature Conservancy in Georgia, and I would like to welcome you all to this morning's Conservation in Atlanta panel. This is the sixth in a series of 7 virtual presentations we've hosted over the past 4 months. Wow. And it is fantastic to see you all here this morning bright and early. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague and moderator for today's panel, Ayanna Williams. Ayanna Williams is the Nature Conservancy in Georgia's Healthy Cities Director. She has been a community organizer and facilitator for over 20 years. She is currently focusing on Atlanta's southeast side and the South River Forest concept, which you will hear more about today. Values of equity and community engagement are consistently woven through Ayanna's work as she explores opportunities for nature-based solutions in urban neighborhoods. So at this time, I would like to pass it off to Ayanna, who will introduce the other panelists and get the conversation started. Ayanna?
Good morning. I am so excited that you all are joining us. Many of you I have known for quite a while with my work here in green spaces in Atlanta and DeKalb County. And I'm really happy that you could join us. And then there are people also joining us who I have not had the pleasure of meeting. With our current pandemic. Unfortunately, we're not able to be face-to-face this morning. We have more than 100 people registered for this webinar. And so that's really an overwhelming response and tells me that people want to know about this project. So I'm really excited that you're here this morning, bright and early, and joining us to learn more about the work that the Nature Conservancy is doing in Atlanta. I'm going to be joined today by Alex Lamley. She is the Conservation Program Manager with the Nature Conservancy, and she's actually been with the organization for over 4 years. And she's going to talk about the work that we're doing, both here in Atlanta and how that connects with the larger TNC mission, both around the world and also in Georgia specifically. And we're also going to be joined by Ryan Gravel, who many of you are probably already familiar with Ryan. He's an urban thinker, designer, author, builder, and speaker. And I'm happy to say, really easy to work with. I've had the pleasure of working with him since coming to the Nature Conservancy a little bit over almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in the fall. And so I am really excited about this conversation and how much information we're going to be able to share with you. But I know because this is such a big idea, we're only going to be whetting your appetite. So please feel free to put in questions as they come to you across the bottom. And if we get to the end and we're not able to answer everyone's question, we are going to share our contact information and you can reach out to us directly. So I want to thank you in advance for your time, and I'm going to continue to keep us moving so that we'll be able to get as much as possible fit in this morning. As I mentioned, this is virtual. It really is my preference to meet out in the parks, and that we've had opportunities in the past to do work days and to have tours, and we really are looking forward to in the future being able to get people out in the parks. As we're talking today, I want you to make note of some of the parks that are already existing in the area that you can go and visit on your own. I'm not allowed to take you on a big tour, but the parks are at this time of this recording, because it is a recording and I don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks, but at the time of this recording, the parks are open, and I would encourage you to explore the parks that currently exist in the South River watershed. As Alex is speaking, I want you to keep in mind that we really are interested in science-based solutions and how those science-based solutions are going to provide a direct benefit to the community. When you think about a science-based solution, it might look like improvements in public health. And that might happen through canopy expansion, which means we're keeping good trees and we're planting more trees. It might be improvements in air quality. It could be enhances in quality of life. We also want to think about the protection and restoration of waterways. This project is a project that is very much centered around water, specifically the South River. And also, science-based solutions are going to facilitate results that are helpful in reversing environmental injustice impacts. So those are some big goals, and we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit today as Alex will speak about the Nature Conservancy worldwide, in Georgia, and here.
Great. Well, thanks, Ayana, and good morning, everyone. I'm excited to see how many people we have. As Ayana mentioned, I've been with TNC for a little over 4 years. I've been working statewide on different conservation projects across the state. And today, what I really wanted to talk with you about was I wanted to give kind of a brief introduction into who we are at the Nature Conservancy for those of you who may not be familiar with us as an organization. And then I wanted to give a high-level overview of why it's important that we do conservation in cities. Here we go. So the Nature Conservancy is the largest environmental nonprofit in the world. We do conservation in 79 different countries and across all 50 states of the United States. We've, to date, protected more than 125 million acres of land across the globe, and 1 million of those acres have been in metropolitan areas. So land protection is definitely our bread and butter. It's something we're really good at. We've done it a lot. When we started as an organization in the 50s, we started as a land trust. So this is something that we have a rich history of doing, and some of that protection work has already been in metro areas. I really wanted to also center this goal that we have at TNC, which is to create a world where people and nature thrive. And as we're having our discussions today, it's important for us to think about, well, where are people, right? And what nature and people are we talking about? And so that's really, I want us to kind of keep that top of mind as we're having our discussions today. The Nature Conservancy in Georgia has, again, a very rich history of land protection. So we have protected over 380,000 acres in the state of Georgia. And from this map, you can see we work all over the state, from North Georgia all the way down to the Okefenokee Swamp, along the coast, and several places in between. So we're working all over the state. And if you've had the opportunity to listen to any of our other webinars or to hear from my other colleagues, you will probably notice that there's a common theme throughout all of our presentations, and this one is no different, and that is that partnerships are really crucial to our work. So I know we have several of our partners on the call today. I'm very excited to see that y'all are here, and I hope that you know that none of this work is possible without you. Everything that we do is really reliant on our partners, and we're so glad to have you here today. Okay, so why are we doing work in Atlanta? This is an important question. We have historically not been working in cities, really. I mean, we have done work in cities, but not we haven't had this concerted effort to protect natural spaces in an urban landscape. So this is a fairly new space for us, and we acknowledge that there are already so many great organizations working here. But again, if we come back to this goal that we have, to create a world where people and nature thrive, then we have to sort of grapple with this question of, well, where are people? And as it turns out, more than half of the world's population lives in cities. So currently, we already have the majority of people living in these city centers, and it's projected that by the year 2050, we're going to see 2.4 billion more people living in cities. So this is where people are, and people really rely on the natural world. Ecosystem services, whether you realize it or not, are doing so many different things for us. And as we see these projections and we think about, okay, well, people are already in cities, we're going to see even more people in cities as we go forward. This urban sprawl, while urbanization in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, this urban sprawl really has the potential to greatly degrade the natural environment if we aren't careful about how we develop and how we grow. And parks and green space are really vital to us as people. They bring several benefits related to public health, sustainability, and resilience as our climate is changing. So this is really important work. And I also wanted to mention that historically, and even still today, there have been some pretty gross inequities in park acreage, quality, and proximity that has disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities, low-income communities. So this, when we're talking about people, and we're talking about protecting people and nature, this is a really important piece, and making sure that since green space and parks are vital to us as people and to our health, that everyone has access to those things. And I wanted to drill in a little bit more on ecosystem services and why green space is important and why especially urban green space is important for us. So urban green space provides just a number of benefits. When we think about city centers, there's a potential for us that really experience higher heat, worse air quality, and having green space, having healthy forests, having lush park space, that can help mitigate some of those potential health impacts that we experience from heat islands, from poor air quality. Stormwater filtration is another excellent ecosystem service that green space can provide. As the water hits the land and runs and it collects pollutants and it runs into our river bodies, this is work that we do all over the world at TNC actually, is thinking about how can we maintain green space along rivers and along streams that can help remove some of those harmful pollutants. And that, when we think about stormwater, is even more pressing here in a city landscape. Obviously, urban green space provides a number of recreational opportunities, which is really vital to us. I mean, especially now more than ever, I think we're feeling how important it is to have access to these green spaces, and that can really improve our quality of life. And then finally, you know, when we look at the research, there is just an immense amount of literature that supports how having access to nature is really detrimental to our mental health, and it can really help improve mental health. So that's just really to name a few of the many benefits that we get from having access and having healthy green space in our cities. And I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about our city in the forest. So Atlanta is forecasted to add 2.9 million people by the year 2050. Okay, so this is a pretty large number of people. To help visualize this or contextualize, this would be like adding the population of the Denver area to Atlanta. So we're looking at some pretty significant growth as we move forward. And this is something we have to grapple with and start asking ourselves, you know, we're going to see this growth. This is something that is going to happen, and how can we do this in a way that is sustainable? And you know, how is this something that we can manage as we go forward? Because again, urbanization is not necessarily a bad thing, but how can we do this in a way that protects our city and the forest? Something that we're known for, and it's something that provides so many different benefits to residents here in the metro area. So as we're looking at avoiding unsustainable development, we want to look at avoiding, you know, creating even more heat islands and exacerbating some of the heat issues that we already have. We want to look at avoiding creating even greater energy burden on communities who already are experiencing some pretty significant energy burden here in our city. Water quality and quantity impacts have the potential to be impacted if we aren't thinking about where we allow development to go in and where are we protecting our already existing green space. And of course, we want to avoid even further inequities around public green space. And then something we don't talk about very often is loss of biodiversity in our city. You know, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of biologists, don't really think too much about biodiversity in the city, and I would say that that's a mistake. There is some really incredible, rich, diverse, mature forests here in our city that is really important, not only for our health and for all of those ecosystem services I mentioned, but also for a lot of really cool species that we can find here right in our own city. So as we're moving forward, I think protection is going to absolutely be vital in thinking about where are these unique, important, already existing green spaces, and how can we make sure that we're protecting those while also, you know, allowing for this growth to occur in our city. And I'm going to touch briefly on the South River because Ryan is going to talk a lot about it, and he has some really excellent things to share with you all. But from the TNC perspective, you know, this work is really exciting for so many different reasons. For those of you who are familiar with our work here in Georgia, you may know that we have a long history of doing protection along the Altamaha River corridor. So this is something that we've been doing for years and years. The Altamaha is our great and scenic river here in Georgia. And the South River is an incredible asset, not only to us here in Atlanta, but to the state, because this is the water that feeds the Altamaha, right? This is one of the headwater systems of our great and scenic Altamaha River. And so when you're thinking about freshwater protection, headwater protection is a huge key part of that. So not only do we have an opportunity to create something really cool here in Atlanta, but we're also protecting the headwaters of a really unique water body. And I also want to mention that this idea for the South River Forest or the South River Park is definitely not something that TNC has come up with on our own. This was in the Atlanta City Design. They envisioned a 3,500 acre park in Southeast Atlanta. So if you look at this map, you can see kind of in the bottom right corner, this, what we call the amoeba. This is the South River Park. This is a 3,500 acre park. And to think about having a park this size, again, this would be like having, this is a park larger than Stone Mountain Park that would exist inside of the perimeter here. So to think of what that would be like to have access to something like that inside of the perimeter, having this contiguous green space, not only is this an incredible vision for our city, for the communities in this area, but also for all of the species and all of the animals. And I mean, there's just so many really cool things that can come from this. So obviously, we have an opportunity to have awesome recreational opportunities in a park like this. We are really interested in maintaining and enhancing the existing forest. If you've been to Constitution Lakes or Entrenchment Creek Park, there are already some really incredible forests, some really incredible areas in this part of the city. And we want to make sure that those are protected because, again, having this rich, diverse forest is so cool and also so important for public health in so many different reasons. We're also interested in reclaiming some industrial land, and all of this is going to support greater biodiversity, which leads to healthier ecosystem services, and that's just good for people and nature. So I think this might be my last slide. Yeah, but I'm really excited about this work. I'm really excited to hear more about how we can all work together on this. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Ayanna and Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I know that we are trying to cover a lot, and we have been getting some questions under the question and answer tab or under the chat function. You can continue to put those in, and when we get to the question and answer after Ryan speaks, we'll address all the questions together. We may not be able to get through all of the questions that are entered, but we do encourage you to go ahead and share those questions as they come to you. We have over 80 people who are on the line with us now. So there probably will be more questions than we'll be able to answer, but I want to encourage you to get them in as they come to you, and we'll get through as many questions as possible. We're going to give plenty of time for questions after Ryan speaks.
Thank you, Ayanna. It's been so cool as you hear Alex describe the work of TNC. It's not, for anybody on this call, certainly it's not hard to imagine how much fun it is to be involved with them and be a part of this collaborative effort. So thanks for that, and Ayanna for the introduction. It's been so cool to work with TNC on this project, not only because we need more protected green space in Atlanta, but because we need the protection and the creation of that green space to proactively address the systemic and interconnected challenges that we have in this region around racial justice and health and climate and growth management. So it's exciting to see that TNC was already engaged in that work in Southeast Atlanta, Thomasville Heights and the Green Jobs Program and other kinds of things. And that they wanted to bring their expertise in land conservation along the Altamaha for the upper river headwaters. So it's exciting to sort of be a part of this, honor to be a collaborator and share this vision with the South River Forest for everybody on the call today. Let's see if I can. As Alex mentioned, my work on the South River began with the Atlanta City Design. I had been hired by Tim Keene, the Commissioner of City Planning for the City of Atlanta, to help envision and craft a design strategy for the inevitable growth that's coming to the city. Alex mentioned the regional growth to the metropolitan area. we believe that the city of Atlanta, the core of the region, will take a larger share of that growth than it has historically because it has transit and the transportation and other transportation challenges and other lifestyle goals that people want now. That urban Atlanta will take on a lot more, and that it's going to grow substantially as a result. And so the city design was designed to leverage that growth for Atlanta to grow into the best possible version of itself. Rather than pretend like it's not going to happen, how do we make sure that if it does happen, it happens on our terms, and that it makes Atlanta a better version of Atlanta, not some other place that we don't like or recognize anymore. The main piece of that that's relevant here are the 5 sort of core values that we designed, that the city design is designed around. The idea being that whether we're talking about a transportation plan or a housing policy, that those things are put in service to a set of values that make sure that we live up to that vision. So the first is equity, which is about a city that's built for everybody, our best chance to live up to Dr. King's dream of the beloved community. Progress is the hard work of achieving that equity. It's not going to be easy. It's the protection of people and places that have value in the face of really powerful economic forces that otherwise will overrun them. Ambition is our motivation for doing that hard work. And Atlanta is a uniquely ambitious place. We make big plans and then we follow through. Access is about providing the physical infrastructure and decisions around growth and conservation so that to support that work. And then nature connects all of that into this particular place on the planet. That's a short version of the Atlanta city design, but the last two, access and nature, really combine to create a physical design for the physical city of the future. And it's not hard to imagine what that looks like. If you look across the skyline, you see the dense parts of Atlanta, and between them are these oceans of tree canopy. It's a beautiful juxtaposition. It's how Atlanta kind of works anyway. And the idea is to be really intentional about creating more of that, supporting that, so that we get both the best of urban life and the best of nature. And one of the many, many ideas that came out of that was the idea for the South River Park, which, as Alex mentioned, is that giant green blob in the southeast part of the city here on this map. That's not the official outline of it. That includes lots of things that aren't part of the park, but that's the idea, to have a large regional park. It's really Metro Atlanta's last chance to have a massive regional park inside 285. There's no other place to do it. Here it is both an opportunity and also needed. So before I go any further, it's important to note, as Alex mentioned, her partners at TNC, this effort wouldn't happen without a lot of other partners and people at the table. The communities, of course. The South River Watershed Alliance deserves a real shout out for working on the South River for a very long time. The various agencies at City of Atlanta and in DeKalb County, including planning and parks and watershed management. The Conservation Fund is a big partner here, as is Park Pride and Trees Atlanta, and a bunch of others. So thank you all if you're a part of those organizations, and if you want to be a part, contact Diana or one of us, and we will bring you in, because it's an exciting vision. I hope you will share it. So what is the South River, you may ask? Let me tell you. You can see in the top right here that the headwaters of the South River are right inside urban Atlanta, on the south side of the city, in East Point and South DeKalb County. The watershed, of course, being also in northern Clayton County and Henry County. As you may know, the north and the west parts of Metro Atlanta drain into the Chattahoochee River into the Gulf of Mexico, but the east and the south flow into the South River, which, as you see on the map on the left, becomes the Ocmulgee River as it flows through Macon, and then the Altamaha, where it comes out on the coast, Atlantic coast at Darien and Sea Island. It's a really important state watershed and one of the most beautiful, wonderful rivers in our state. And the headwaters of that are in this significantly degraded part of Atlanta. And that's where the opportunity for this park comes in. not only to provide green space, recreational green space, and jobs and other opportunities for the people of Metro Atlanta, but also to filter, clean, hold on to, and improve the ecology of downstream communities. This is the river, although you wouldn't know it. You have to go out and find it, and it's really hidden in the city. And of course, there are reasons for that. This is the native condition of the South River, flowing there west to east, labeled Weelaunee, which may be one of the names that the indigenous people called it. This was part of the Muskogee Nation. And Trenchant Creek there you see flowing from the north. As the urban Atlanta grew, which is just to the northwest, you can see that it came with roadways, railroads. This is Moreland Avenue here. This is the U.S. Penitentiary, which is at the southern end of Boulevard, beautiful Beaux-Arts building south of the zoo. And, you've got other, settlements in the area. But with suburbanization and white flight, because of the prisons and some other things happening in this area, it was kind of bypassed. It was skipped over with growth. And what happened in this area, but it really became a dumping ground, literally through about at least 5 landfills, but also other correctional facilities and other things that other parts of the region didn't want. They got sort of jammed in here, and really contributing to the environmental decline, economic decline of this area. Including all kinds of environmental contamination from the landfills and all kinds of other things. So the turning point really came from the community in the 1990s as the community started to fight back against the pollution of their groundwater and of the South River itself through court battles and consent decrees, all kinds of litigation and other largely with the South River Watershed Alliance and community partners. And as that was happening, people began discovering that there was a river there. And with the consent decrees, several new county parks were opened, Constitution Lakes and Trenchant Creek Park. These things came online and people started recognizing the natural beauty of parts of this area. And then of course, with the growth of the city, which is not exactly here yet, but certainly coming, you can see that the growth pressure is headed in this direction. And so there's an urgency to protect the land now while we can for the purposes of green space, but also to make sure that the communities who stuck it out through the hard times get to stay and enjoy the benefits of their labor, their work, and their efforts that really created this turning point, this movement that made all of this possible today. A lot of other parts of the region are rethinking waterways. You're familiar, of course, with the Chattahoochee River and probably the Proctor Creek Greenway, the Finding the Flint River, which is similarly the headwaters under the airport, the South River, Northeast Atlanta. Lots of other waterways are being, quote unquote, rediscovered, and the South River's opportunity is really at a scale much larger than any of these. There are models for what to do with degraded waterways all around the world, how to transform landfills into parks, those kinds of things. There are all kinds of models for that. So we've been looking into that. And then imagining on this massive landscape, what might be possible. And we don't have the answers. That's not what the purpose of this is. The purpose is really just to inspire and get people excited about the possibility and want to be a part of coming in and making sure that this opportunity happens, and that we and our children and our grandchildren get to enjoy all the promise of this and potential of the South River. The territory you can see here. This is the again, this is Moreland Avenue here and I-285. So we're southeast of Atlanta. This is I-20. If you're familiar with the Starlight Drive-In, that is right here. And then the Federal Pen is over here for orientation. These are public lands, public land and forested land. So the dark solid green are city and county parks. This is Southside Park on Jonesboro Road. This is Constitution Lakes. This is Entrenchment Creek Park. And then the dash line, this is public land, but not a park. This is the Honor Farm. Some people know it as the Old Prison Farm, 330 acres owned by the city of Atlanta, but outside of the city limits. And there's some other publicly owned but non-park land that could be easily transferred into a park. And then the hatched area is privately owned land that is forested. So you see the sort of green canopy opportunity. And I'll make a note of this property in a little while. That's Lake Charlotte, but I need to change that into a different color. These are degraded sort of urbanized land. So this is deforested land that's along the South River or strategic for some other reason. The dark green patches are landfills. So these are not at threat for redevelopment, but could be easily part of the park. So what you're looking at now is a lot of public land and private land that could be part of the park. And then the next slide shows the intersection of those areas with existing communities and making sure that those connections are made and strategic sort of mitigations for against gentrification, but also creating economic opportunities. And so we're thoughtful about the growth management of that area. Obviously, with a landscape that big that includes both degraded land that could become ball fields or constructed wetlands, or existing forests that need to be preserved, there's all kinds of additional opportunities for recreation, for farming and horseback and education and stormwater demonstration projects. You can imagine any number of wildlife, habitat, science-related work that could happen in addition to just general recreation and fun. And of course, if I know everybody is cooped up like I am, and everybody, we want to get out. The idea of having a landscape this large where you can really go out and explore and get away and really enjoy nature is really appealing. And the idea that it's only a few miles, down the road, a short ride from the Beltline on your bike would be pretty incredible. Of course, a landscape this big is complicated. The ownership is very challenging. Lots of different kinds of parcels with different kinds of ownership, developed and undeveloped. This is a challenging kind of project. It's not going to be easy. The ecological value, of course, also matters if we're talking about making real impacts for the downstream ecologies and the stormwater filtration, all the science stuff that you like that science stuff that Alex mentioned. But it kind of comes together with a concept vision like this. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a master plan. This is not some finished thing. This is just enough of an idea that we can begin sharing what this vision is to try to get people on board to move forward and get moving. And then again, being really thoughtful and looking for partners to engage on how to manage the growth that would be related to something like this becoming real. And we can talk about that in the discussion if anybody wants to. I mean, again, it's early on, so we're sort of formulating these paths, but that's where we are. So far, we've been really conceptualizing what that is, getting enough of an idea together to be able to share it and start to build partnerships. And there's a team out building sort of community network and sharing it at a community level, which TNC is doing an incredible job of. And then strategizing, beginning to think about how you would put together, bring together the nuts and bolts to make something like this happen. Next comes, more sharing, more strategies, more community building. I mean, this isn't going to be easy. It's a huge effort and undertaking. But when you think about it as really the last chance Atlanta has to do something this big, this close to the heart of the city, we kind of have to do it. We have to figure out how to do it. The cool thing is that we don't have to wait until it's done. We can enjoy it now. And I mentioned, I've been working on this project with TNC now for a couple of years in various different ways. And so I've been exploring quite a bit, but during the COVID-19, I've been, getting out more often and just going out on my own, social distancing, exploring in the south part of the city. And even in the land that's already open to the public, already an existing park, it's so easy to see the potential for what this landscape has to offer. This is Entrenchment Creek Park. It's not the part of the park that most people know, which is where the little model airplane landing strip is, and all the controversy around the Blackhall Studios and all that. This is right along Entrenchment Creek there on the right. A beautiful forest with lots of nature trails that you can go hike right now. I've been out there multiple times. I don't see anybody out there. It's so nice to be able to get out and escape the city so close to home. This is another view walking up along the river. And this is another one. It's really great and really different kinds of forest and other landscapes. It's really neat. This is Southside Park. I don't have as many pictures, at least not nice green spring and summer pictures, but Southside Park is really known for its mountain bike trails and ball fields. They're down off of Jonesboro Road, right at 285. Really a lot of, I know the mountain bike groups are out there all the time. That's fun to see. And then Constitution Lakes, of course, which is an incredible regional asset. The lakes really attract a lot of waterfowl, so there's lots of birding and fishing and just people out to get out of town, or get out of town, I guess. You probably know the Dolphin, you may have heard of the Dolphin Trail, another unique sort of cultural artifact at Constitution Lakes. Some folk art kind of project along a trail there. And then this is a part of Constitution Lakes that is another lake that's not as well known or as easily accessed, but is technically part of the county land. And it begins to suggest that there's a lot of other land out there nearby that could be imagined as part of this landscape. And it's really exciting. So that's Constitution Lakes. One example is Lake Charlotte. So I mentioned that early on. It's a 220-acre tract of land. You may have seen it in the news recently. The city recently purchased it for green space expansion. It is not yet open to the public, so I want to make sure that you know that. There will be an effort ahead of us that will go through some planning work about what that looks like. And so I encourage you to participate in that. But it's a really important and step, hopefully, toward the South River. I want to shout out to the partners who made it possible with the Conservation Fund and the City of Atlanta, Department of City Planning and Department of Parks and Recreation, and of course, Council and everybody else. Lake Charlotte has soapstone boulders all throughout it, and these were used by Native people to carve bowls and other things. You can see this depression here. That's where one of the bowls was carved and then broken off. So that's really cool that you not only get the nature part, but you also get the connection to indigenous people, which I think we've lost a lot of. We don't talk about a lot of that in Metro Atlanta. It's neat to see that there were people here right in the forest where we are also living today. And this is the former lake of Lake Charlotte, the meadow that is now at the bottom of what used to be a lake. And then there's other landscapes which are not yet open, but the Donzie landfills, and this is the creek, Entrenchment Creek, as it flows between the Donzie landfills, which has been apparently approved to have path build a trail through here. So this is, this work in this area has been going on for a long time, and TNC and this team is just sort of participating in developing that vision and building on that good work and looking for other partners to make it come to life. So with that, I will looking forward to the discussion and any questions you might have about that. Happy to answer as best I can. And I will pass the mic back over to Ayana.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I know there were a couple of hiccups in terms of the presentation for people seeing some of the slides. Hopefully when we share the recording, you'll be able to see those with no problem. Also, we have got a number of questions coming in under the question and answer tab. I would encourage you to continue to share your questions, and we're going to begin to move through those questions and get through as many of those as we can. We got a question from Angela Jang, and she asks, how can we ensure development without displacement and radically avoid the inequities perpetrated? Okay, let me start again. How can we ensure development without displacement and radically avoid inequities perpetrated with the Beltline in terms of housing and affordability? This is a promise we need to keep to our Black and Brown communities in Atlanta in future developments. That question came from Angela. You can also enter anonymous questions if you don't want me to share that the question came from you. So I would like to just touch on this a little bit. I think that the best way to ensure that we don't have that type of displacement is for people to be involved early, for there to be opportunities for people who currently live in the area and those who have a historic connection to this area to be at the table when we're talking about creating this park and green space. It's also really important that we start having these conversations about displacement, and we start having conversations with partners who are doing housing in a way that we can't wait until the park is already there. We can't wait until we get further along to even begin to think about those things. The only way it works is if we do it now, and it goes hand in hand with thinking about protecting the land and protecting the people at the same time. And so I also want to give Ryan an opportunity to address this question. I'm sure this is not the first time you have received a question like this. So if you please share your thoughts on how we can do this differently and some of the lessons that may have been learned from other projects in the Atlanta area.
Sure, and thank you for the question. Obviously, it's an important and really urgent issue. And I, tread lightly into this work because, and really wouldn't be here at the table if I didn't believe that, TNC was committed to participating in figuring this out. These are not easy questions. There's not like a list of things that we just have to do and that's the answer. It's an evolving sort of set of challenges and also an insufficient toolbox of, set of tools that we have to address. I think it's important to say first, and I'll get specific about the South River, but it's also important to just remark generally that the challenges sort of embedded in the question are really wide scale, national probably, if not at least regional kinds of issues that are really embedded in many of the systems that sort of create, where we are. And so by trying to address it project by project is often insufficient. And the problem ultimately is not the project itself, because the project, whether we're talking about this or we're talking about the Beltline or we're talking about a high-performing local public school or a new grocery store in a community, any improvement that we make in a community attracts, more people want to be a part of it because it makes it a more attractive community. And of course, there have been people in this community working very hard for a long time to make the community better and make it more improve it. So the problem is the answer is not to make nice things and improve communities. The answer is to do it in a way that supports those communities. And how that happens requires a lot of policy that is not sort of locally, but generally. We need better housing policy generally. We need to address not just housing, but also economic opportunity. If you made more money, you could afford rising housing prices. If there were job opportunities and opportunities to start businesses, and if we'd been doing all of that for the last generation, it wouldn't be the issue that it is today. And so we can't pretend like any one of these projects or any individual effort is going to solve all of that. What we can do is create models for beginning to change the system and do that. And that's what I mean when I say that, you know, and we are doing this as much as we're thinking about the sort of nature, green space, land piece of this, we're also thinking about those impacts and trying to figure out how that happens. Now, for the South River Park, I mean, certainly whatever policies that the city has, whether it's the zoning overlays, those kinds of things that it has for other parts of the city, we can apply that to this part. Now, it's a little challenging because it's multi-jurisdictional. So part of it's in the city of Atlanta, parts of it in DeKalb County, and those two entities have different policies, so that makes it somewhat challenging. But the city does, I know, have those kinds of policies. It could apply that to this area. There are also programs for starting businesses and economic opportunity that can be attracted to and applied to this area that requires the leadership in both the public and the private sector to speak up and lift that up and ensure that happens and hold leadership accountable to those impacts. And so those are things that we can do too. I don't know if I don't want to ramble on too much, but you know, that's where we are.
Definitely a conversation that has to be ongoing, and which is why I started the question and answer period with this question. Something that every time that we are coming together and speaking about the project, we want this to be at the forefront of our minds, not only when we're talking about engaging the community, when we're engaging African Americans and Latinos who are in this area, but also thinking about it when we are having every conversation, making sure the right people are at the table, making sure that Ryan doesn't have all the answers, TNC doesn't have all the answers. So partnering with people who have been thinking about this for a long time and who have the answers. They may not have the resources to implement those answers, but these are not new questions in the African American community. And a lot of people have a lot of solutions that may have been tried on a small scale, may have been, you know, untested, but have a lot of potential. And this is an opportunity, this project and any other project that's happening in 2020 or beyond, it's an opportunity to test out some of those and to put money behind what, you know, what could be a bigger idea than a park. You know, you have to do it simultaneously. And while we're focused on the green space and the people and nature aspect, you can't have that without having the larger conversation. And so I want to make sure that everyone who's on this call and others who are, you know, possibly interested in partnering with us, you know, feel free to reach out and let's have the conversation and see how together we can come up with some solutions that might be outside the box or maybe tried and true and just need to happen within this landscape.
Can I just also add that, you know, I tried to emphasize in the beginning, but I know that when we start seeing pictures and maps and things, it feels like it's really official, but it should be clear that this is really just a concept at this point. And so this isn't like some big strategy or plan that the city and the county have already kind of committed to. We're very still in the early stages of that. And so the idea is to, as we lift up this idea that it includes all of those other policies, all those other things, so that it's held accountable to that. And from a community engagement standpoint, really beginning to, you know, talking to the community before we build all that buy-in, so that these communities on either side of this massive landscape, which may not have seen themselves as related, now begin to be able to have a network where they can communicate and share ideas among each other and then to the public as things begin to get put together. So we're really in the beginning of assembling those kinds of coalitions and strategies for that would be required to get it off the ground in the best possible way.
So I'm going to, the next question is actually to Alex. There was a question early on asking about, oh no, I've lost it. Asking about if you could give some more detail about the provisioning and regulating aspects of ecosystem services. I know that was a hard transition. We're gonna go back to more questions for Ryan. We'll kind of go back and forth as the questions come in. So Alex, if you can speak about ecosystem services, the provisions and regulations.
Yeah, so Yeah, I'm going to do my best to answer this question because ecosystem services are a fun thing to talk about because I think a lot of us don't think about how the natural world is already doing so much for us every single day that we benefit from somewhat unknowingly. So, you know, if we even think about the way that our water is cycled through the environment, the way it's taken up by trees, put back into the environment, or, you know, the way that photosynthesizers are capturing energy from light and turning it into carbohydrates and energy that we as people can consume. I mean, this is, it's sort of like miraculous when you really start to think about all of the things that the natural world is doing for us, and that we are not immune to that in an urban landscape. So I think where ecosystem services are really going to really play a key role for us in thinking about why urban green space is important. Some of the really key things for me are things like water filtration. So the idea that as, you know, water moves across the landscape, it collects oils and pollutants and all kinds of other things. And as they, you know, the way a watershed works is that that water eventually finds its way into smaller streams, which get into bigger rivers. And so over time, you know, there can be an accumulation of a lot of nasty things in our water body, which then, you know, our water treatment plants have to get that out. And as pollution goes up, costs of cleaning water goes up. And so there's just so many different ways that us protecting our natural world can really benefit us on so many different levels. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but I can get too far into that, so I have to be careful. But I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yes, I think that does begin to answer the question. I want to move next to a question that we got from Margaret Bradley, who she wanted us to speak to the fact that sometimes when you look at these maps, you might see your grandmother's, the lot where your grandmother lives, or you might see other property that you know to be privately owned. And I just wanted to ask Ryan to speak to the fact that when we talk about a forest, a South River forest, that the concept in many ways is looking at the area and opportunities to protect in a way that is both public and private land. Can you speak to that?
Sure. When we started talking about, you know, the city design had a concept called the South River Park, which, you know, sounds like a specific, you know, set of parcels of land with a line around it that's a park. We started envisioning what we, you know, expanding that kind of vision. We wanted to include, you know, we wanted that concept to be bigger. And if you think about like a state park or a national park, there are often parcels within that park that are privately owned and where people live. They're called inholdings. And it's just your grandmother's farm who happened to everybody else around, all the property around ended up being part of this national park, but she still lives there. That's kind of the idea here. We have crafted you know, we've put together a vision that does include a lot of privately owned land, but it is predominantly almost all of it, I believe, you know, industrial and commercial tracts of land, mostly undeveloped or marginally developed, meaning it's really just used to store tractor trailers mostly. The privately residential land is really just set aside in the forest. And what that would mean would be that we would want to look at the protection and preservation of the tree canopy and sort of watershed impacts for the residential area, but not really put any, not to take over that home or to put really any restrictions on it at all, really. So that's just, people have owned their homes, they have a right to continue to live on them or do whatever they want with them. And so this isn't really about any attempt to address that. But that would, I think the larger idea of nature in the city design that would be really applicable here would be to imagine that humans are part of an ecosystem and that we live within this greater ecosystem, this greater forest ecosystem of Atlanta. And so, not just the people who live there, but the businesses in the district, and the stormwater, energy, water kind of impacts of those businesses and homes would be considered part of that ecological system. And so that's, I'm going to max out my scientific expertise there, but that's kind of the idea.
So the next question, we've gotten it from a couple of different people. I believe Shannon Lee as well as Alexis Weber are asking, how can people get involved by giving their time and their abilities? How can they, whether it be individual citizens or groups that have an interest in being at the table? And I can start answering that question. We actually had planned to have a robust engagement process happening at this time, inviting people out to face-to-face meetings, doing community tours, as well as having a half-day summit. With the current numbers with COVID-19, we will not be bringing people together in a room. We'll continue to do webinars and have other virtual opportunities to engage, but I also would encourage you to contact me directly. We can have a one-on-one conversation about how you have specific skills and experience that you would like to use. Also, right now, both the City of Atlanta and DeKalb County are doing some long-term park planning. Atlanta is in a 10-year park plan. You can go to their website and take a survey. And as part of that survey, you can highlight that you have interest in the City of Atlanta investing in this type of project. Also, DeKalb County is also looking at some strategic planning for their park system. If you are unable to attend the meetings that they have, you can always feel free to reach out to your elected officials, your council people, your commissioners if you're in DeKalb County, the director of parks, the commissioner of parks in City of Atlanta. Feel free to reach out to them to, you could share this video, this recording that we're gonna share with you. You could invite them to come out and learn more about the park. I or one of the people on my team can be available to come out to virtually join you on a community meeting or other things of that nature. We are limited right now because of the virus and everything, but we still are very interested in engaging. And I really see this as an opportunity where in some cases things have slowed down because of this, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to have these conversations and move things forward. When we're thinking about protecting people and land, there really is no time to stop. And so using current technology, having the one-on-one conversations as well as those larger conversations, I think that this is the perfect time to get involved. As Ryan mentioned, we're early in the process of beginning to actualize this and beginning to move forward. And so this is the time to get involved. Even though it may not look like anything is happening, this is the time to start thinking about it and planning for it, because the people who are thinking about developing it, they don't just show up one day and do it. They're planning well in advance. And so we have to also think about it and plan for it starting yesterday. I don't know, I guess I'll go with that for the answer to that question. And at the end, they are going to share all of our emails, my email, Alex's email, and Ryan's email. So you can reach out to any of us. And if we're not able to answer the question, we're just, we can figure out who can answer the question. There are questions about the landfills. There's a couple of questions. One question is about with the landfills, being adjacent to the rivers and to the, a part of the watershed. Are they leaching out toxic chemicals? Brian, do you know if these landfills are lined?
The landfills have had problems historically, and that's what led to some of the legal action against them and why they were ultimately closed. The remediation I'm uncertain about, and really the opportunities that they present we are unsure about. Again, another example of how early we are in this process. We know from looking around the world that there are models for how landfills can be transformed to be part of parks and improve. But those things are based, the realities will be based on science of each landfill, and we don't have those studies done yet. So that would be a next step. I meant to mention when we're talking about gentrification, the idea of doing a equitable development plan. there's all kinds of planning that needs to happen. The idea that this is an initial concept, following this would come all kinds of other work, to implement this big vision. An equitable development plan would comprehensively address the challenges around gentrification. And similarly, each of the landfills needs detailed research on what's happening, what's opportunities. I believe one of them is construction debris, which has more leeway in terms of what's possible to use it for. And then some of them are newer, and some of them are older, and so those have those would shape what can actually happen there. But the idea being that in the long term, if you think about 50, 100 years out, of course they should be used in some way. So whether it's near term, it may be a near term passive use, like habitat, grazing fields for deer or bison or something. And then in the long term, it may be possible to do something else.
So one of the questions asked about phasing, whether or not there were plans for this project to be kind of phased in, or if it was something that was going to happen all at once. You're going to wake up one day and there's going to be a park. I know that we're in early stages, and but with this size of a project, we're talking about 3,500 acres of land that's in Atlanta, and it's in DeKalb, and some of it is public and some of it is private. I think that it would have to be a phased approach. Is that something that you could speak to, Ryan?
Yeah, it absolutely will be phased, because we don't even know, we're uncertain again that it's all going to happen, but we know that something has happened now. It's phased because you can already go out there. Phase 1 is complete. It's called Southside Park, Constitution Lakes, and then Trenchant Creek Park. It's already there. A future phase will be Lake Charlotte. It'll be open to the public at some point after the planning and preparatory work is done. And so even if we don't get the rest of it, the South River Forest is already there in some kind of way. And the landfills are not going to be developed with condos and stuff. So at some point, that's 600-800 acres that could be added to that landscape, which is phenomenal. And a lot of the land is privately owned, as you know. There's a lot of challenges in the face of all the growth that's coming. It's why there's a lot of urgency around doing this if we want to do it to get going. So we probably won't get everything that we have envisioned. And so absolutely it will be phased, and it should be. We shouldn't have to wait until we're gone before we can enjoy it. It's a long
And that
term.
does bring us to one of the questions was around I had mentioned, and you talked about some of the parks that are currently open that you can enjoy. Someone mentioned to me in the comments, which you guys cannot see, I'm so sorry, that Sugar Creek Golf Course is not open, which no one has said that it is, but it just brings up the point that because of the pandemic, the golf courses are not open. And so while it is right there adjacent to the South River Forest concept, and when we've done tours, we have stopped there. Right now that is not open, neither the golf course nor the tennis centers. I did want to mention that some of the other parks in DeKalb, though, like a Gresham Park and some of those other spaces, the outdoor trails and things like that are open. And I would encourage you to visit that in addition to Entrenchment Creek. I'm going to ask Alex a question, and then I'm going to come back with a specific Entrenchment Creek question that we have received from Joe Perry. But first, Alex, you mentioned the population growth, and the question was that for City of Atlanta itself, or was that for the greater metro area?
Yeah, so that's for the greater metro area, and I got that figure from the Atlanta Regional Commission. So they've got some really great data and great figures that kind of show where they're getting those projections from, and I linked to it in the PowerPoint. I'm not sure if we're going to be sharing our presentation, but yeah. Okay, great. So there's lots of great information on those projections there. Yeah. Sorry for any confusion.
That's why we have the question and answer, so we can clarify any points that that are needed. And so I appreciate we're getting a lot of questions, and I want you guys to keep the questions coming. We do still have about 20 more minutes. The question I'm going to ask next, though, is a little bit of a doozy. So we're going to spend some time there. And a lot of these questions really lend themselves to additional conversation. It's not something we're going to be able to just, give a quick answer and keep on moving. We got to keep talking about it. And in some cases, we have to keep poking at it if we're going to see any sort of really movement and change. So the next question, like I said, is my whole screen just moved. The next question is about Entrenchment Creek. So Joe Perry has asked, how do you keep our valuable forest in Entrenchment Creek Park from being traded to Blackhall Movie Studios when our DeKalb County CEO and TPO will not listen to us? How do we save the old Atlanta prison farm? So those are two questions, but I think that it really is getting at, even though we say that phase one is complete, right, and you have Entrenchment Creek and you have parks, what's the role for the community, for the nonprofits? How can there be, how can we protect those lands that already are parks? How can we access those properties that might be publicly owned but not privately accessible? And I know that this is a question that Ryan definitely has some thoughts on. And I just wanted to share that early on when I became involved with the Nature Conservancy, I had the opportunity to work with the South River Watershed Alliance with Jackie Eccles and Margaret Spalding, and really had the opportunity to learn a lot about the work that they've been doing for many, many years, to really focus on the water quality and work with, sometimes really working with the water as their focus. And sometimes that put them at odds with DeKalb County. And sometimes when you're thinking about nature and you're valuing nature and people, it may not be always a popular opinion, but we had the opportunity to make a public statement about the Entrenchment Creek Park and the possible trade of that park land, which would be publicly owned land, for privately owned land. And it may be a little bit confusing because I don't have slides about it, but I know that a number of people on the call are really aware of this possibility. And the concern is that it sets a precedent. If you can trade public land, park land, for private land, that's something that wouldn't just be able to be done with Entrenchment Creek Park, but you have to think about your own neighborhood park. This is in DeKalb County. There are many parks throughout DeKalb County who have communities that are really passionate about those parks. And Entrenchment Creek Park is not a traditional park. You don't have ball fields, and you don't necessarily have, there's no swimming pool, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. And in some cases, to some people, it's more valuable. In terms of the ecological value, there's a huge ecological value for that property in Entrenchment Creek. And so when we're thinking about expanding and getting more parkland, it is difficult to face the fact that we could be losing existing parkland in this sort of swap or trade. And so the Nature Conservancy did come out publicly to the DeKalb County leadership and officials, saying that we did not support this proposed trade, and that there were issues around the ecological value of what the county would be receiving, and also the larger issue of the precedent of swapping out public land for private land. So right now is the time to contact your elected officials and let them know if you are opposed to this, if you have concerns or questions. See if you can get them out there. Entrenchment Creek Park is open to the public. The best way to get someone to care about public space is to get them out there, have them hear the birds, have them see there's all kind of stuff out there this time of year. You could see snakes or, all kind of bugs, and there's just great stuff out there. Poison ivy is really, flourishing this time of year in Georgia. You might want to avoid that, but getting people actually out in the parks that are open is a great way to get support, and for people to see things that they may not have known was there. Being sure that you are articulating your concern, that you tell others about it. There's a website and a Facebook page around Stop the Swap that has a lot of information and maps and other things that could help. If you're not familiar with this issue, you can get some education around that. And I know that Margaret and others will be glad to have you join, in that conversation, as we try to make sure that it's not a question of do you have development or parks, but the question really is how can you have both in a way that is going to be good for the county, good for the residents, and good for nature. And that really is what my job is, to try and find that synergy, try to figure out how you can have both as opposed to either or. Ryan?
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think that the controversy around the Blackhall Studio land swap is a really good example of how not doing anything is also a problem. Just like gentrification and housing. I mean, these are going to be issues whether this park is built or not. This area, as I mentioned, and you can see easily in history, has been a real dumping ground for a long time. It wasn't that long ago. An asphalt plant was approved just down the street from Entrenchment Creek Park. This kind of stuff is still happening. The guy off of Moreland was cutting down the trees illegally and got taken to state court. I mean, this stuff happens down there. And if you live in the communities, because it's, it won't be a surprise that some of this stuff is still happening. Tires burning at the Honor Farm, and, it's crazy. So if not doing anything is also not the answer. And so we have to be engaged in this. And regarding the land swap itself, we were taken aback by it. That was surprising to think. We had imagined this park that not only included the existing park, right, but also included some of that land up there off of Boulder Crest that Blackhall owned and had not yet built on. And I think the answer is not to, well, I don't know what the answer is, but what I've been trying to help with is imagine a future what is a better answer? Instead of only pressing against Blackhall and or the county commissioners, whoever, to not do this bad thing. Blackhall it could be a really great partner or a neighbor to this park, and obviously is valued by the community and others. So what's a better answer, and how can we find a place for Blackhall to appropriately expand in a way that fits into the vision of the park? And when you start looking at that, there's a lot of options, actually. And I think that, with everything, sort of going on, I think we may have a little bit more time to come to that kind of an answer. It will require, some folks in leadership at DeKalb and others to kind of see the opportunity of it, and help. It won't be easy, but I do think it's possible to build that better version, a better answer.
So I want to put two questions together. One question asks, how is the City of Atlanta involved in this project? And then another was more of a comment than a question that spoke to Lake Charlotte, that they were glad that Lake Charlotte was protected because it's the only documented population of shagbark hickory inside of 285. Now, I have had the pleasure of seeing the shagbark hickory, and I wish that I could put a picture up right now, but I'm not that tech savvy to talk to you, answer questions, and pull up pictures. But you should Google shagbark hickory. It really is a unique looking, tree, and something that when Lake Charlotte is open to the public, only being able to see that is inside of 285 in that location, that's a big deal. And I think that speaks to the ecological value of some of this land and property that is within 285, that is part of the City of Atlanta or just adjacent in DeKalb County, where there's so much nature. And if you don't know that, if you don't know someone who invites you to it, if you don't happen upon it, it's really hard to find Constitution Lakes Park if nobody tells you that it's there, And so just the opportunity to kind of level that playing field so the people who live near it, so they know that it's there, so that the people who are using these spaces are the communities that are adjacent to the spaces. I think that is part of our work. And one of the questions when they ask about how is the city of Atlanta involved, I think that the protection of Lake Charlotte was really, that was a city of Atlanta purchase. And it was done with tree recompense funds, the first large purchase of already forested land that was purchased with tree recompense funds for protection of the urban forest. And when we think about ecology and we think about Atlanta, you have to think about trees. And so I think the city of Atlanta also has been kind of slogging through the possibility of improving or changing. There's questions about if it'll be an improvement, but working on the tree ordinance. And I think that that is another way that this type of work really, there's an intersection with what's going on in terms of the city of Atlanta planning, in terms of the city of Atlanta Parks plan. Sometimes they're doing work that is connected to this and they don't even know it. And it's our job, both TNC as well as everybody who's on this call, to make sure that they see that connection. And then sometimes, like the purchase of a Lake Charlotte, they're very aware that you know, the work that they're doing or the purchase is a part of this larger vision. And I don't know, Ryan, if you can speak at all to kind of the city of Atlanta's current role. And I know that there's so much possibility for them to be even more involved in the future. But I think it's a mixed blessing. You really want to have, you know, strong community support before you get, before the city really gets too much of their hands on it. So, you know, you're really going to have both.
I would only add to watch for some work around the update to the Parks Master Plan with the Department of Parks and Recreation. That could be a point of engagement for folks in the community.
And Alex, do you have any, and this may be a question that the answer is no, but they mentioned the shag hickory bark. And are there any other interesting ecological things that a person might find within this area of the South River watershed that they might want to look out for? I know other locations have, you know, exciting salamanders, or there might be certain birds that you might see.
Yeah, so this area is definitely a great place to go birding. If you are interested in bird watching, I highly recommend checking out these parks that we've mentioned. There's some really, really cool stuff that you can see that you wouldn't maybe expect to see inside of the perimeter. So I think, you know, for me personally, birding is definitely a big draw to a lot of these public spaces. And then, yeah, there's some really cool species. I think there's, I believe it's the marbled salamander. It is kind of a rare species to find in this area, in this metro area. And so, I don't know, there's definitely some really cool species that are worth looking at. But yeah, for me personally, like I definitely go to see the birds.
So
I see we've got some people adding some really cool.
Of like a gazillion birds that were documented recently. And there's someone here from, what's the organization that loves birds that certainly I can't,
Audubon.
The Audubon Society. We have several people from the Audubon Society who are on this call, and one of them shared with us that a couple of birds of interest would be the yellow-crowned night heron and the rusty blackbird. Those are things that you might see probably at Constitution Lakes or Entrenchment Creek Park. So get out there and see some cool birds and animals. There is a question, and I've only got a couple more minutes. There's definitely more questions that I'm able to answer here. But really, this is just the beginning of a conversation. We have to continue to both talk about this as well as to find ways to actionate, to do actual things that'll move it forward. Not only have the conversations internally, but bring the right people in and continue to move forward. Because even though there is in many ways a pause due to the pandemic, things are still happening and we don't have time really to wait. So the last question, it comes from Nick Stevens. And he says the South River Forest straddles both Atlanta and unincorporated DeKalb County, and that creates some challenges or creates opportunity because maybe Atlanta won't do it, but DeKalb is excited about it. Okay, that part is not in his question. His question is it a better strategy to try and get those two jurisdictions to coordinate and collaborate on preservation, or to push for annexation so that the whole park will fall in one jurisdiction? And Nick is suggesting that that would be City of Atlanta. So I can say unequivocally that I do not have a position on annexation. That is not what this park does not require annexation. There are definitely models of other parks and green spaces like this that have straddled jurisdictions. And the fact that this is only 2 jurisdictions is actually amazing. When you think about the Chattahoochee Riverlands, that goes through so many more jurisdictions. And so we're not thinking that it is required to have annexation. There are opportunities for the jurisdictions to work together, and some of the work doesn't require them to work together for the park to work. I think there is some coordination that'll need to happen. But like I said, that's not something that is unheard of or insurmountable. Right.
Can I just add that whether the DeKalb portion is annexed into the city of Atlanta or some other city or remains unincorporated, no matter what happens, this is absolutely a collaboration between City of Atlanta and DeKalb County. There's no way to do it in a way that's not. So it makes it challenging. I think that, the real challenge, I think, is to just get both entities to see this as a shared opportunity and a need, and an urgent kind of need, because they do have to work together. And, historically, again, not to beat a dead horse, but it's been used as a dumping ground. It's been like both have said, well, we'll just forget it. We'll just put all that stuff down there that nobody else wants. And obviously not only the community, but the environment has suffered as a consequence. We need to see this as a place for reconciling those wrongs and fixing and creating something new, and creating, aspirationally doing something else. Again, it's important. Something's going to happen. Not doing anything isn't really an option. So getting everybody on board toward that end goal is really important. And it's going to take everybody. And it's more than just the city and the county. It's going to take regional cooperation for watershed and state, probably for lots of things. And but it can and it should, because it's a story not just about the immediate community, but about all of Georgia as being the headwaters of the Altamaha. So I think we need to think about it as big and messy and complicated, and how it gets done exactly, we will need to be figuring out. And certainly the conversation about annexation keeps coming up. There's no reason to have a position on that now without having, being a little further down the road and seeing what the community wants to happen. It doesn't really matter, because ultimately it can happen in a number of different ways.
So I have only 3 minutes, and I really pushed to make sure that this was an hour and a half, because I knew that there were going to be a lot of questions and opportunity for robust conversation. And so I want to thank everyone who submitted questions and apologize that we did not have a chance to answer all of the questions here. I look forward to ongoing conversations and to continue to move this work forward. My role is really just looking to engage with the community and create the enabling conditions for this to be a project where equity is at the center of everything that happens. And so I can only do that with you working with me. I want to, again, thank Alex and thank Ryan and thank everybody for joining. We will be sending out a recording of this presentation, and I'm going to turn it back over to Selena with only 2 minutes left to wrap it up.
Thanks, Ayanna. Thanks, everyone. Wasn't that incredibly inspiring? I know I'm inspired because I am from Atlanta, and having known about these areas for so long, and how neglected they were. It's so exciting and inspiring to see this vision. So I don't know if you all are familiar with Arabia Mountain, but we have a couple of things coming up that I want to tell you about. And I neglected to thank you all for your participation. And so speaking of participation, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment of your time to complete a quick 2-question satisfaction poll at the end of this session, that would be so helpful as we continue to improve our offerings. And if today's panel discussion has you wanting to learn more about the South River, there are a couple of things to keep on your radar. First, this Saturday, July 18th, our partners over at the South River Watershed Alliance that Ayanna mentioned will be hosting a river paddle, and that's taking place from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And more information on that can be found on their website, southriver.org/events. Also, 1 week from today, that's Tuesday, July 21st at noon, we, TNC, will partner with the Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area Alliance, and that's, the picture that you're seeing on your screen is Arabia Mountain, to host a presentation on the ecology, history, culture, and recreational opportunities that you can find in this beautiful place. And coincidentally, that river paddle that I mentioned is going to be going right through the Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area. So if you haven't already signed up for next week's presentation, we encourage that you do, and you'll receive information on how to sign up in the follow-up to this event. So in closing, we would like to leave you with a little teaser. This is a little bit of drone footage that was captured by our partners over at Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area Alliance, and it is the South River. It's beautiful, and so we encourage you to enjoy the views of this beautiful river and make it a great day. Thanks everyone again for attending.